Hi, this is Kara from the Special Needs Mom podcast.
And this is Angela from Especially Organized, Sensible Solutions for Special Needs Moms.
We have this heart for special needs moms. And so we thought, you know what, let's combine forces. And we have come up with what we're calling the Purge Party. And you can pretty much guess what it is. It's a party where we're going to come together and we're going to purge or, in general, accomplish a goal, a small goal together. So we have set this for January 27th, starting at 8 o'clock for my Pacific Coast people.
Which means 11 o'clock for all of you on the East Coast. So this is an opportunity. If you have something on your to-do list that has just been stuck there and you are wanting to move it up on the list, you're wanting to tackle, maybe it's a space or an area of your home or a category in your home that has just needed a little time and attention. This is your opportunity for you to be online with us while you work and have access for us to help you answer your questions, help guide you, and just serve you for those 2 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can tell like what we've designed is just this very high level of support for that project that you just haven't been able to tackle on your own. The thing that we are envisioning is that you get to leave this purge party feeling so accomplished because you did the thing. You started the year off getting that thing done that you were stuck on last year. And so it's a momentum builder, if you will. You can go ahead and sign up. We have a link ready for you. And we are offering this for $40 for the whole experience.
Absolutely. And we hope you'll join us. I think it's going to be really fun. It's going to be a great group of moms of special needs kids. So we all get each other. We all have an understanding of what it's like to have something on our to-do list, but just we haven't been able to tackle it yet. So I hope that you will join us. We're super excited to bring this to you, and we are thrilled to work with you.
All right. We'll see you all there. Hi, I'm Kara, life coach, wife, and mom to 4 incredible and unique children. It wasn't all that long ago that my son received a diagnosis that had my world come crashing down. I lacked the ability to see past the circumstances, which felt impossible, and the dreams I once had for my life and family felt destroyed. Fast forward past many years of surviving and not at all thriving, and you'll see a mom who trusts that she can handle anything that comes her way and has access to the power and confidence that once felt so lacking. I created the Special Needs Mom podcast to create connection and community with moms who find themselves feeling trapped and with no one who really understands. My intention is to spark the flare of possibility in your own life and rekindle your ability to dream. This isn't a podcast about your special needs child. This is a podcast about you. If you are a mom who feels anxious, alone, or stuck, then you are in the right place. Welcome. Hello and welcome back to the Special Needs Mom podcast. We are here today for part 2 of the real, raw, and relatable behind the scenes of our surgery and recovery. And so you might want to go back to listen to last week's episode if you're new here. However, it's not a must, so no stress. Glad you're here today. Before I get into this episode, I want to make sure that I share with you an announcement that I shared last week, and that is the opening of a community group, specifically around this podcast and this community. I think last week I forgot to say that we're launching February 1st. And I think I also forgot to say that if you're interested, go to the show notes and there'll be clear information on how to sign up. It's free, and so as I tell you about it, I want you to think to yourself, why wouldn't I do this? It's fun, it's easy, and it's free. The community really is going to be focused around taking the content of this podcast and putting it into discussion, and also providing other opportunities for connection, for collaboration, and really kind of elevating the conversation that we're having as special needs moms of what it looks like to be a mom who feels like she has the capacity, the confidence, the creativity to have the experience that she wants for herself and her special needs child. It's going to be a place where I offer opportunities for coaching, for different maybe teachings or lessons I want to do. It's going to be a place where I'm thinking it'll be really fun to have some of the guests that we have on the show as doing potentially some live conversations, live Q&A. I have this picture where it's like, where the podcast is like this beautiful still piece of art, and where it's like the group, this community group it's like it's coming off the page and coming into automation. So it's like coming live. So you are invited no matter, I was thinking about this recently. I wonder if some people listen to this podcast and think, oh, I don't belong. My child's needs aren't blank enough. And I have no idea if that's the case. However, no matter the need, great or small, you are welcome in this group. There's no special enough. Okay? I'll say this as well. If your child doesn't have a diagnosis, yet you relate to the content of the show, you are welcome. Okay, so again, go to the show notes for more information. It's launching February 1st. It's fun, easy, and free. Why would you not be there? Okay, let's get into the content of our show. Last week, we talked about kind of my personal experience and really kind of highlighted the powerlessness and the lack of control experience. And I gave a lot of examples of what that looked like in real life. But I also gave a snapshot of what I chose to do to create a structure of support that gave me access to a different experience, to not feeling utterly out of control and powerless. And this week, we're going to look at the surgery and recovery in 3 different parts. We're going to look at what worked, what didn't work, and what would I do differently. All right, well, let's start from the top. What worked? I accepted all the offers. I noticed early on, people said, we want to help you. We want to support you. How can we help you? And so actually, I gave a fair amount of thought to, okay, how can I let all the people that want to help me, how can I let them help me? And so when people said, hey, can I bring you dinner? I said, yes. Or I said, sure, let me send you the link. Or I made a mental note, because in some cases we didn't have a link set up yet, to send them a link once we had it. So I really paid attention to people wanting to come on alongside us and help us. And I want to put a note in here that this does not mean that it was always easy for me. There was an instance, I already shared it in the podcast, that one of my friends that I had lost touch with offered to bring me lunch. And I had talked to her for 20 years. And it was one of those things where I'm like, oh, okay, I haven't talked to you. Sure, I'll take your lunch. But I made it sound like, just give me your lunch and leave. It was not like that. It was okay, yeah, it's been 20 years. So this could be a little bit I don't know, am I going to be socially awkward? Probably. Yet I surprised her and I said yes. And I think I did share it already on the podcast that it's been one of the biggest gifts of this experience. Okay. But it wasn't easy. It required me not just the accepting of lunch and dinners, but accepting financial support, asking for financial support. It required me to come in contact with some thoughts and beliefs that I had about money and receiving help that were uncomfortable, were really thoughts that were keeping me kind of stuck in some places. And so I had to go wrestle with those thoughts. I had to kind of, again, become aware of these thoughts that were really kind of impacting how I felt and my actions. And ultimately, I got to choose outside of those thoughts because those thoughts were not serving me. When I looked at them, when I kind of took them off the shelf and I examined them, I was like, wait a second, you're not even true. You're something I made up in my mind that made sense at one time, maybe, but it's just, I don't like you anymore. So I'm tossing you back. You're going back on the shelf and I'm going to pick a new one. Okay, what else worked? Getting into therapy. So interestingly enough, right before we learned about Levi's recent diagnosis, I realized, oh, wow, I have some things I'm noticing for myself that I think is evidence of some trauma that's unresolved. And so I want to get into some therapy to help kind of resolve those, help to de-escalate the experience in hospital settings. And so prior to getting the diagnosis, I was already kind of in the, like my line was tossed in several different ponds in finding a therapist. And so it was actually the week of the diagnosis that I was able to get back into therapy so that I could really support my emotional well-being and just have another person to support me during the process. And it was really, really valuable. I talked about it last week. So I talked about this team that I had supporting me. So I had a project manager, I had coaches on call, I had the Caring Bridge website. Of course, I had family and friends that didn't have official titles. I had a large team, people that I knew that I could go to, like to support different children in different areas. That was actually something I forgot to mention last week. Something I had in mind is kind of having a point person for each of my children, because I was very afraid that they were going to get lost in the mix. And so part of that, I was like, okay, like how can I tend to all of my children's needs during this time? And my answer was to, one, pay attention to their needs, to talk about it, and to also almost like outsource that. Be like, okay, hey, you know my child, you love my child. And like, for instance, my daughter is very close to her prior nanny, now friend. And so I was like, okay, like she's the person for my daughter. She's going to be the person able to connect to her in a very unique way. She felt very comfortable with her, and it was like just kind of amazing. So that's something I didn't mention last week, but it did work. So I added it in here. Focusing on the basics. So for me, this was very, very basic. It was sleeping. It was eating. It maybe was exercising, but usually it wasn't. And it was seeing friends. It wasn't a lot more. Another thing that really worked was focusing on the present moment. I'm sure you can imagine that so much of the fear that I had, that you have, is about the future. It's about what's going to happen. What's going to happen when? What's going to happen if? And so by being able to kind of recenter myself in the present moment, to really recognize, oh, okay, like actually in this moment, we're all well, we're all safe, we all have what we need, we're actually all kind of happy. And like maybe even like available to go do something fun. So that really worked. And so strategically, I kind of decided, hey, let's go do this family activity to kind of all just be together before we're not going to be together. And really being able to focus and be present in that moment and purely enjoy that moment and not have to have it be kind of because of this impending doom kind of thing. Okay, another thing that worked was what I'm calling the transition day. If you followed along the whole journey, you might remember that we got discharged from the hospital initially, got sent home, and it was like a big celebration. We were super happy about it. As you know, living at the hospital sucks. And so we were home, we were celebrating, we were recovering, and then we weren't. We had a leak, which required us to go back into the hospital, back into surgery, and back into a longer, more serious stay. So that day was really hard. That day was one of the hardest days, probably the hardest day prior to the surgery day, with the exception of the surgery day. And what I noticed that day is I was just pissed. Not even like pissed mad, but just like, this is not going how I thought it would. I don't want this to be happening. I'm very unhappy. Just, it was not a good day. And so I allowed it to not be a good day. And that's what I want to say, what worked. I allowed the breakdown to be like, this is not okay. Like, this is not what I wanted to happen. And so I just indulged in those upset feelings. I allowed them all. I didn't try to make them go away. I didn't try to make it better. I just allowed the suck. And I said, you know what? Tomorrow, when I wake up, I'm going to change my attitude. But I just allowed to be upset that day. And I think I went shopping for more soft clothes. I went to acupuncture that day. Thankfully, I had it scheduled. And my husband actually took the shift at the hospital for the surgery so that I could get, like, we kind of had a routine. And so it allowed me to stay on routine with the kids and with the other kids and all that. And so we kind of stayed with the routine, even though that meant that I actually couldn't be the one to support my son in surgery, which was hard for me, but it worked. And so I think what I want to say worked here is allowing the anger and the upset and giving it some like parameters, giving it like, okay, I'm going to just be upset today. You might say it's longer than a day. You might take a week. You might take a month. It doesn't matter the time period. It just matters giving some space to do that. What worked? Having a community of special needs moms around me. Now, this was something that I noticed that was distinctly different than my experience 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, I was obviously a 10-year younger mom and had fewer children and had zero experience in the hospital and didn't really have any friends that I knew that had been in the hospital. And so therefore, even though I had a pretty outstanding community, I didn't really have anybody that like from a contextual base, like really got it. And what I noticed this time around was I have a pretty profound special needs mom community from the work that I do. And the ability to connect with moms that it's not like I'm best friends with these moms, but it's like we have a relationship now because maybe they were a guest on the podcast. Maybe they're part of a podcast community that I'm in. Maybe they are just somebody that I've been chatting with on social media, that I was able to receive the words that they had shared, the kindness that they expressed in a different way. And in a way that made me feel really held, really understood, really, really supported. Not to say that the support from my non-special needs moms wasn't that way, but I did experience it in a different way. In a way, actually, that kind of changed my perspective about even having a special needs community around us. And it just was something that I experienced as really, really beautiful and really, really powerful. And the last thing I want to share that worked, and this one might surprise you, is eating for comfort. I gained about 15 pounds during this whole experience. And I was thinking about this. I probably would do it again because I'm currently in the process of shedding that, what I call my comfort layer. Because I don't like having it on me necessarily now. I don't like having it on me. But it was a low-hanging fruit way of making myself feel comfortable in the moment. I don't know if this is definitely not a one-size-fits-all. This is not right for everybody. But I'm looking back at my experience and saying, you know what? That worked for me at the time. And so I'm so thankful I had that ability. And I'm thankful that I was able to give myself the gift of easy comfort without judgment. That wasn't perfect. Every once in a while I was like, oh gosh, why did I do this to myself? But that was more in the aftermath rather than the experience of being in it. Okay, let's transition now into what didn't work. Just like I alluded to just a second ago, what didn't work? The judgment. So early on, and kind of more, we would see it what I shared in last week's episode, there was a lot of judgment from myself on how I should think, feel, and act. I look back at it now, I'm like, that is a real interesting way of people pleasing, in the sense of like I was caught in trying to act how people thought I should act when my son was re-diagnosed with brain cancer. Even now, as I look at this, I'm not quite sure why that was so important to me. Probably because I don't love people like looking at me and judging me, and I don't like being wrong. And so maybe I was just trying to like, okay, like this is one thing I can cross off and like make sure that people don't think I'm doing it wrong. I don't know. Usually when we take a closer look at this stuff, it doesn't totally make sense. Like from like what we're doing is not usually in alignment with what we actually want. We look at actually like it actually is creating something. When we look at it, we're like, that's actually not even what I want. Like, I don't actually want to control what people think and feel about me. Obviously, I can't either. Oftentimes, especially in the early days of diagnosis and processing the diagnosis, I would make myself wrong for being either really upset or I'd make myself wrong for feeling okay. really you can see like that there was no way I was accepting myself. Like it was like I was wrong either way. So that's what we could call a lose-lose situation. But there was just so much of an attempt to try to get it right, which is always an attempt to feel safe. And so I was really trying to kind of intellectually grapple with this, probably also in an attempt not to have to feel. So the judgment was definitely something that, I mean, it's something I'm always working on, but it was very much, it was really active during this time. And like I think I mentioned, I would kind of try to coach myself to happiness in like all the situations. And I look at that now, it's like, well, no, I actually don't want to be happy about my son having surgery. And so I think it's like it's easy to kind of over apply some of the concepts that we learn in kind of weird ways. So that's something that didn't work. My tendency, and this is kind of in the same vein of judgment, my tendency as a person, I'm an Enneagram 3, which if you know anything about the Enneagram, usually pretty competitive people, and we like to achieve and accomplish. That's just kind of how we're set up. And so I like to win. And so I think it was like I was trying to win this situation. And it's not really a winnable game. If you think about it in the sense that like it's not something that there is to win or lose. And I think I was trying to make it all feel good. Like that was my way of winning. And just like I kind of previously stated, like it's not supposed to feel good necessarily. Like in the sense of like it's not wrong to have something like a surgery be devastating. So it's easy to see that now. I mean, I could see it probably intellectually before, but just because you understand something intellectually doesn't mean you believe it. So that's kind of a conversation for a different day. Another thing that didn't work, and I really can only see this in retrospect, is not considering or putting enough energy into the after phase. And so next week, we're going to talk more about recovery. But I really underestimated what I would need in terms of like my emotional need, my financial need, my physical need, all the needs to recover. What the constant is my son has his needs and I am his mom. And so I am his primary caretaker along with my husband. And so simultaneously to that, I have my needs to care for. And so I think it's like if I lived in a bubble, it might have been much easier to go and recover, go and kind of tend to my wounds, if you will. But I wasn't in a bubble. I was navigating my children back in school, getting Levi back healthy, Thanksgiving and Christmas, and of course, like all the challenges of COVID. And so I was managing all that on top of my own recovery. And I'm sure you can, put two and two together. It was a lot to handle, a lot to process. And like nothing slows down and stops to go give you a chance to recover. And so I think I underestimated what I needed. And had I not, I think I would have planned a little bit differently. We'll do that in the next section. I think the other thing that didn't work is having more support in place for Levi. In the sense that I think that what the impact to me was that I was his only, and my husband obviously were his only emotional supports. And so that led to us being kind of maybe limited, like one in our ability to really support him, like in our actual like tools that we have to support a child in this way. And also like we're so close to the like challenges that sometimes having somebody else come in and support is like very, very valuable. And so we didn't have this in place. And so that didn't work. Let's move on now to what would I do differently? One thing that was easy to see is I think I would fundraise differently. I think early on, I think probably I mentioned earlier a little bit of like my money story. I was like, I think I was so desperately not wanting to be in the place where we might need more people's help that I think I just kind of like avoided thinking about it. I maybe didn't look at how I could fully support myself in this area. And so we did have a way to receive funds, and we did receive many generous funds, which were hugely supportive. But I think I might have been even more clear than we were. I think I might have given people more avenues to support us because I know that they wanted to. So that would be something that I would do differently. Another thing that I would do differently is having more structures in place for me to feel and process in the moment. Let me tell you what I mean by this. Like I mentioned earlier, I really struggled with that judgment, with not holding a lot of compassion for myself in those moments. And so when I say structure, like for me, this might have looked like kind of having a structure of daily writing, like writing out and processing my thoughts, my feelings, and just kind of like allowing it to all be as a way of kind of holding space for myself. Or even having a quick conversation with a trusted friend or coach during the time to help me almost like, what comes to my mind right now is almost like knowing, it's like if I was an addict, knowing that I would like desire to have whatever thing I was addicted to, that I would have like my sponsor to say, hey, I'm really struggling with this today. Let's talk about it. So it's almost like knowing that I'm addicted to judgment, and that's my kind of like my easy go back to having somebody to talk to on a daily basis. Maybe it was like, and maybe it's like 5 minutes a day, and saying, hey, here's where I'm struggling. Here's where I'm judging, and almost like confessing that so that I can move on and kind of not kind of get stuck in that spiral. So that's what I mean by structure, like kind of having some things in place that support me in areas where I know that I'm not necessarily reliable to support myself. Another area where I most definitely would prepare for is like I said, like the after. I didn't do anything after. I was basically like I planned for like the hospital and like nothing beyond. And I think I would have put more childcare in place. Just like I mentioned a second ago, like it was almost like I had still so much on my plate at this time because I didn't plan for it. It's almost like all the support ended after the hospital ended. So therefore, I think it would have given me some more space to be able to process and to care for myself. Like, if I might have planned to kind of take a day for myself where I actually go away from my children, maybe go to a spa, kind of start to lean into some of the recovery tools earlier. So that leads to that part of the recovery phase. I took a trip with my husband, which was profoundly bucket filling, we'll call it restorative. And so I probably would have planned to do this. I would have planned for that more in advance. We planned that trip very last minute. So I would have committed to that so I could have looked forward to it. And I probably would have planned, just like I mentioned, I probably would have planned like a half a day away or like a spa day or something that gave myself a little bit more reprieve and respite from all that we had going on. And the last thing I would do differently is to have been more generous with my planned time off. As I look back at it now, and probably if I was honest with myself as I was looking at it then, I was being stingy. I was being stingy with myself and giving myself like spacious time off. I was kind of looking at it from like, okay, how can I give myself the minimal time off so that the financial impact and the impact to my clients, that was something I was really worried about, is the minimal. Whereas if I could do it differently, what would I do is I would look at it from the perspective of how can I give myself luscious support? And that probably would have looked like planning to have longer than I needed off. And actually, now that I look back, now that I say this, I did try to do a little bit of that, but I just drastically underestimated what I would need. So, as we know, these things do not always go how we plan. And it didn't. And so therefore, my strategy of kind of doing like the minimal or maybe just a little bit more than minimal, it didn't really work. And so it ended up creating me having to kind of continually to create more space for myself, which my clients are amazing and generous, and I don't think was an issue for them, but I didn't like it. It would have caused me less stress to actually design to have more time off for myself. So that wraps up this week's episode. And I hope that you got value from kind of looking at it in this evaluation type way. This little evaluation tool is something that I picked up from another coach, and I love it. I think it's so simple, and it can literally be applied to anything, any profession, anything we ever do anywhere. And it allows us just to kind of step back and be like, okay, like first off, what worked? Like we aren't going to get everything perfect the first time. And yet it allows us to step back and kind of first off celebrate what we liked, what went well, and kind of honor ourselves. And then like anything in life, we're not going to get it right the first time. Like there's always going to be places that didn't work, breakdowns that happened. So we get to look at them. We get to create language around them. What might we do differently? And that conversation invites us to stepping into more power and to more of bringing ourselves to any situation in a way that both creates more of the outcome that we want, and also the experience that we want to have. Okay, well, I reminded you last week, and I'm going to remind you again. If you haven't taken a moment to share this episode with a fellow mom that you know that has a special needs child, I invite you to do so. Additionally, if you would take a second to rate and or review the podcast on iTunes or Spotify, I would be so honored. We will see you next week, where we're going to do the last of this series, where we're going to look at the recovery phase. So I'm going to talk all about all the things that went into recovery for myself. We're separating this out from my child. And I have learned a lot along the way. And so I cannot wait to share it with you. See you next week. One more thing before we officially wrap up this show. Sometimes when I'm listening to podcasts, I have the experience of wanting more. I'm listening at the very end thinking, I sure wish that episode didn't end. I invite you, if you feel in any way the same way, I invite you to the Special Needs Mom podcast community, which is a free group that I host on Facebook, where we as a community of fellow moms who listen to this podcast and are experiencing life in similar shoes, get to talk to one another, get to share stories, get to actually interact. I hope you'll consider joining. See you over there.